Okay, I have Visual Studio open into my React Milestone 3 folder. I don't have any files open and I'm not running the application yet. So let's take a look at our layout here. We have node modules, of course, where, as we know, npm installs is managed through package.json, and that is where the React framework is installed when we start this. We also have a public folder that we need to visit. Now, the public folder is a folder that's directly visible by the browser. That is, it will be published to the website by the build system. It also relates to package.json. When this hooks into a build system, this would be published. The public folder would be published to a public folder that's directly visible by the browser. So that's useful to us because that's where I put small cards here. So that's where you need to put it to. Then you can just refer to it by a relative path once it's in the public folder. We'll see that in the code. But public folder, you can easily path to it and easily use any images or resources in the public folder. Mind that those are also publicly visible by the browser. Now, that said, images, especially if you're going to use an application that has a lot of images, there's reasons why you want to put images down in source. It's not as convenient to refer to them because then they become they're not just something that's published flat and that the build system has no longer any interest in it. They're viewed as a resource. They're tagged, for example, when images are cached in the browser commonly. This adds things to optimize caching by the browser and by internet service providers. It helps manage the upload of images to your website. So if you have a really heavy, especially if you have a site that depends heavily on images, it's worth looking into the technology of putting those images inside the source folder where they're not directly visible by the browser. And in fact, they're delivered through official channels, that is React channels. And that's why it's able to get a better handle on the optimization of those image handling resources. We put small cards in public because it's easier for us to deal with it, as we'll see. So for the most part, I left this application alone from the React Starter app. You see all these folders probably unused now, but in terms of starting the application, we know that app.js is central to that. So let's take a look at what we're having here. And in fact, let me start the application and get it going so we can interact with it as we walk through the code. So I've left the name app.js intact. If I change the name of this root application, I'd have to change it everywhere. So I left that alone. I did change it from a function to an app because it's going to have state, and we'll see that. So initial game state, actually. JavaScript object with these two properties, initial true and the button text start game. The button text, this is the button text that we're going to use. I'll show you that when we get to that button. Here we have a constructor that's called super props. This warning is for TypeScript, so I think it's a bug that it's showing us that. It's perfectly appropriate in JavaScript to have call super. In fact, it's required to do that. So that's a little irritating. So we set the state variable. That's what the constructor has to do. This.state, this.initial game state. So it's equal to this object here. So let's take another crack at making sure that we understand that state needs to be not modifiable by running code. So since JavaScript doesn't have a formal way for us to do that, you can express those types of objects in Java, but we don't have those types of visibility modifiers in JavaScript that allow us to create immutable objects, such as strings in Java. Instead, we're dependent on us never to put state on the left-hand side of an equal sign when we use it. And think about what that would mean here if this code actually put state on the left-hand side of an equal sign. This is a shallow copy right here. So any modification to state would change initial game state and break this logic, because the idea is that every time this is used, a new game would start. And indeed, when you see restart game, we'll use that. That's why I have it in a single location here. Okay, so now we have a callback function and expressed in terms of arrow function. Arrow functions make this work like you expect it to. So that they're very convenient to use. And we can see the use of fetch here. Remember, fetch returns promises. So it asynchronously connects to the API and then registers these promises in parallel. So this is going to fetch from this URL. I made the method actually dependent upon the state variable here, this state initial. So when the game is brand new, this fetch method is going to be a post method. So think about what post does in our API. It registers a new game, or it returns an existing game. So either one of those I want to post. It doesn't advance the game. Now, I made a modification, as I referred to post. Before I was returning a game, which just has game ID, and now I'm returning from post the same thing that put returns, that is a turn. So a quick look at our server code here to show that modification. So if you're going to get, there's various ways to get this to working, but for me, the most convenient way to get it to work was to have post return a turn rather than a game, just like put does, but without advancing it. So let's take a look at put, and here our put mapping. So we get a game, and then we advance the next turn, right? So then we return that turn. The difference really here between post and put is that we're not calling next turn. We're just calling get turn. So every time post is called with the same game name, it will return the same game. So that's a slight modification I made to my post method that was necessary to get this to work. And it's important here because our then bodies then don't have to distinguish between post and put. They both respond on success the same way. And here I have, notice the headers, content type, application JSON. That's what the server expects. It won't accept it without that content type, as we've seen also in our Postman setups. So then, this is a success path. Data comes back, data.json. This is kind of, I wrote it explicitly like this for demonstration purposes, but also I found it useful to log information. I've mostly deleted my console.logs in this code. I have a few, but not very many. But before, as I was developing it, I had them everywhere. So this syntax makes it more convenient to do that. And more convenient maybe to see. But remember, if I don't have a body here, I don't have curly braces, then I just have data.json, and that's an implied return type, and that's a simple statement. And that's what mostly you'll see in tutorials, data.json in brackets. By the way, this then, in order to pass on to the next then, because it does return a promise, but in order to get the data to the next one, that is, to have this game data be set, it has to return data, because that's what gets passed to the next processing of then, right? So this cascades down and refines the data for us. So we get data.json, that's the text stream that came from the wire. We return it into Java. We essentially create an object map for this and return, and D refers to that object map, a live map in JavaScript of the data. This returns it, and then this method gets it. So that's what actually sets state. So actually, I could get rid of this then, of course, and collapse it all into here, but I wanted to show you this explicitly. So then we call set state. So what happens when set state gets updated or gets called? State gets updated, obviously, with a new state object. And we don't modify the existing state object. We create a new one. That's what happens here. But then all the child components get updated methods. So when start game button is pressed, and I'll show you how that gets hooked up here. This happens asynchronously. This gets called. It gets parsed. The set state is called. And now we have a game that started. Okay, see if you can get a start game going, and watch the next video.